Hey Ryan.
Hello.
Thought I'd just join and
Uh,
listen in.
Oh, that's cool. We were talking Kubecon really, so
Oh, okay.
I forget, where are you
uh,
based?
I am in Ontario, Canada,
Oh yeah, cool.
close to Detroit.
Nice. So probably not coming to Kubecon Europe.
No, no.
It's quite a trek.
Yeah, that'd be cool to do though. Where is it being hosted this year?
It's in Paris this year.
Oh, okay.
uh,
Interesting.
Yeah, I'm gonna guess there's a bunch of cheap hotels ready for the Olympics later in the summer. So that's what they've come for. Um, did
yes.
you did you have any workflowy questions that you wanted to run through? Might as well make
No,
use of the time.
no. I was just curious what the office hours were like, I guess, more than anything.
Okay.
There's nobody here, I guess, from the community.
It really varies. Um,
Yeah.
We also normally have a grown up to help us, and we have no grown ups today. Like JP's normally here, um, so we're
Cool.
riding it alone today. But that's cool. I saw you asked a question in Slack actually earlier in the week. Did you
Yeah,
get that
no.
one solved?
Yeah, that wasn't an Argo workflow issue. That was an us issue. Uh, I kind of
Longhorn being a pain.
yeah.
I've previously used Longhorn and eventually gave up on it. I never got it quite stable enough to stick with. It seems like it ought to be really good. Um,
Yeah. It was
I
just
want it go on.
the team that deployed Kubernetes for us is using Rancher.
Yeah.
It comes by default with it. Um, but yeah, no, it's slow to attach a volume, so it's making our workflows slow. And then we're trying like the V2. We changed the storage class to what do they call it? The data engine V2.
Right.
And it seems to be less stable. So uh,
That's what you aim for with version 2. I
yeah,
really want Longhorn to succeed, but I think Rancher kind of, well, I don't know. It's only opinion. I shouldn't give my opinion in public. Uh,
yeah, it also it could also be us. Like we haven't used Longhorn very long, so it could just be newness to it. Um,
we, if you decide to switch and want something more stable, this is slightly historic. I found that Ceph was more reliable at doing a very sort of similar kind of job.
okay,
It wasn't necessarily uh, quicker at the actual disk IO. So it may matter, but it was quicker at dismounting and it stayed working for longer.
okay, yeah. Well, we were kind of following your idea today. We're looking at just having like an NFS storage available for it to the workflows to mount and use that for the persistent storage between the pods or the
Yeah.
tasks.
Yeah.
Uh, and we're hoping that'll be a little faster in terms of like attaching the storage. All the storage is backed by NVMe, so it should be pretty fast.
Yeah. Yeah, it should be. And I think if you use the NFS server provisioner that I think I linked to you to before, that is quick at attaching and detaching. At least I'm imagining compared to your Longhorn times, it should be quicker
Yeah.
because it's running. Even if it's running on top of Longhorn, it only starts up once and acquires its read write once disk, and then starts providing that as a read write many disk.
Yeah,
Performance is good
yeah.
from
No,
my experience.
we're gonna give that a
If
shot.
I don't know, I haven't been involved in your conversation, so forgive me if this is repeating stuff you already know. But if you're using it just for interstep, um, conversations and it's data you don't really care about at the end, you could just back it with ephemeral disk instead of backing it with any kind of PVC. So you're just using the spare disk on the node. Then you won't have to worry about mounting any disk to NFS server provisioner.
Yeah, we don't care about we don't care about like the workspace after the workflow is done. But
Cool.
only if the pod gets scheduled on a different node, then it won't be available to it, right?
So the NFS server provisioner will mount ephemeral disk to itself,
Yeah.
and then it will serve that sort of back to your workflows in a loop as PVCs. So then your workflows, it doesn't matter what pods where your pods for your workflows go, as long as your NFS server provisioner pod stays alive. So as long as you give that a high enough priority or a high enough, resources and all that sort of stuff, then you should be okay for the life of the workflow. I mean, it's not, there is a risk that you lose data in the middle of a workflow. It happens extremely rarely for us.
Yeah, all our builds are like reproducible. So like if we do lose it, we just rerun the build.
Yeah, that's it. That's all we do. Yeah, so that's another option. So you don't even have to back it with any other PVC if you don't want to. We do both. So we have some that are more persistent and we use that for things like Golang caching and stuff like that. And then others which are the more kind of interstep data passing. We just don't care about it. So it just lives in ephemeral land.
Okay.
I assume someone has sent you my lightning talk on this.
I believe so.
Alan's looking quite guilty.
No, I'm pretty sure I have, but I've sent it to several people, so trying to.
I can check her.
We might as well pop it in the chat here. I mean, it's in case anyone watches back in the future. When did I do this talk? There it is.
I will take that link. Thank you.
Nice. Yeah, it's also got a link for the NFS server provisioner, which I hope is the same one that Alan suggested. There's a couple out there. They're mostly the same. Like you probably won't notice a difference, but there are some minor features between them.
I think there used to be a semi-official one, and then that got abandoned. And yeah, and then there's ones that are based on NFS4. Your one's got Ganesha in it, hasn't it?
Yep.
That's a good one.
Cool. Yeah, we'll look at that.
Cool. What else were we going to talk about, Alan?
We were going to talk about Pod RBAC, which was what I originally thought Ryan's problem might be when he's just on Slack because it's gone up to version 3.5.5. Want me to just talk? So, so fun times. In Workflows version 3.4, a new method of getting the results of running a workflow node or a pod was introduced, which is called Workflow Task Results, which is a new custom resource at 3.4 time, and that was documented as being the way you should set up so that your pods that you were running, the service account they were running under, could create workflow task results and patch workflow task results, because it might create a workflow task result as it goes and then need to patch the task results to say I've completed. So those two RBAC rules are documented as required for 3.4. However, the old mechanism, which was pod patching, which was so the pods that were running your workflow nodes would patch themselves with some information to say how they were doing and what results they'd got, continue to work, and the emissary executor would fall back to doing that. And if you look in your logs, you may see that in your logs saying falling back to pod patching. This means you haven't set up Workflows 3.4 onwards correctly. The story gets more interesting at some point in 3.5, this became slightly more mandatory. We think about 3.5.2. And in 3.5.5, it becomes absolutely mandatory, as in pod patching will not work correctly. The emissary executor, I believe what's going on is it is pod patching anyway, but the controller doesn't honor that as being the information required. It requires workflow task results to be passed back in order for the nodes in your workflow DAG to be considered completed. So you will end up with workflows that look like they're just running forever, swirly-whirlies in the user interface, showing that they are continuing to run even though the pods are completed, because workflow task results have not been created. The stock RBAC is incorrect for this, and will mean that if you just install the manifest that Workflows produces, you won't have a working workflow system. Partly because we don't supply manifests, we don't supply any service account or roles or role bindings in order to bind to your workflow pods. The Helm chart from version somewhere in November does do the right thing. So at that point, if you're installing that mechanism, via that mechanism, it should be setting up your RBAC rules correctly. Anything anybody else wants to talk about on that? That's my summary of it. We really ought to fix the upstream and maybe make this more obvious, because there have been at least 3 points in the last week where this has been the root cause of an issue with customers and people on Slack.
It's probably worth mentioning that I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, in each of those 3 cases, the error messages were slightly different. And so I guess the takeaway is, if you've got workflows that are sort of hanging halfway through, that's probably the best symptom of this problem. And then obviously you can go off and check to see if your role has the patch that I've just put in the chat there. That's probably the best way. That's why we're sort of skirting around not really saying a magic error message or anything like that, because it doesn't seem to give a consistent one, which just makes the whole thing even more fun.
Yeah, and 3.5.2 certainly has more issues with not having that role installed than 3.4 used to. So with that role available, you know.
Yeah.
And I thought that might be your issue, Ryan, but it turned out not to be.
I was actually reading that GitHub issue that day, and we updated our RBAC to make sure that was included. Like in the comments there was the workflow task results, the verbs was like patch and create or something.
That's it.
Yeah, so we made sure that was in our RBAC for our workflow service account.
Yeah.
And it did look like our workflows, like we had a bunch of issues because we made a lot of changes. So it could have affected us, because it looked like workflows weren't being reported at one point, but then we rolled everything back and did one at a time. We also included that RBAC change from that GitHub issue. So we didn't see that issue, like the workflow not being reported again. So I don't know if it's related, but
if you had upgraded to 3.5.5, so I suspect you would have hit the issue,
right,
just based on that. If you had, your
right, yeah. And then since we added it, and then we did the first thing we did was upgraded to 3.5.5, but with that RBAC change. So we didn't see it again. But so I can't really say whether or not we were affected. But yeah. So I have a question then. So the workflow task results are a new way of reporting results for our workflow. It used to be in pod annotations.
Yes. I mean, it's not that new. It's in 3.4. So but yes, they were introduced then and documented as mandatory, but not actually mandatory until 3.5.5. There's been various issues with in sort of more esoteric cases with workflows, not maybe with busy control planes and things where workflows are completing, all the pods are completing, and then the workflow controller doesn't believe the workflow is completed. And in order to try and resolve those, the workflow task result collection within the controller has been sort of tightened up to make sure that we are getting all the workflow task results before we mark the workflow as complete and things like that. There's a number of issues that are sort of intertangled, and I'm not entirely sure which of those has, well, I can probably pinpoint the one that's caused 3.5.5 to absolutely require this, but it's accumulation of issues trying to fix other issues in the 3.5 timeframe that have sort of gradually tightened this noose around pod annotation patching working. And I haven't had a discussion with the other maintainers about whether this is intended yet. It's Kubecon EU next week. Some of that might happen in person, but otherwise it's going to be the week after when we try and sort of unravel this and work out where we want to go, whether we want to make pod patching continue to work or just carry on with how 3.5.5 works.
I was under the impression, just from the way the docs are written, that pod patching was going to go at some point. I mean, it's theoretically worse security.
Oh,
Yeah.
we're using patching our workflow.
So pod patching in general is fine.
Oh, okay.
Like if you like pod patching as a concept in Kubernetes isn't going anywhere. Pod patching for managing the status of a workflow.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we're just using the pod patch to modify the resources for a pod.
That's fine.
Right.
So that's fine, and you have made the conscious decision to do that, and you have, as a company, decided that allowing a workflow to patch a pod is okay, but that could be quite a potentially dangerous permission to give a workflow.
Right.
And so by moving to workflow task set results, workflow task results, in theory, you're making that more secure because it's its own thing that you're modifying, and all that's there for is for the status of a workflow, essentially. There is a really old issue linked in the docs on this page, in fact, on the RBAC page, that kind of hints at why people don't want to continue with using pod patching for this.
Yeah,
but it's a bit before our time, really.
In theory, this means that we should remove the pod patching code to clean stuff up as well, and nobody's sort of making moves towards doing that at the moment. So that's the sort of collective decision that needs to be made. We're going to go this way, remove pod patching, and as an avenue, and make it slightly more obvious when workflow task results aren't working, that because the error messages are pretty hidden.
What was the benefit of workflow task results versus the way you're doing it before?
So with workflow task results, they're specifically for reporting that my pod has done this action and these are the results of it. My output parameters are these things. And therefore granting it to pods that are created by a workflow is a safe thing to do because nobody else cares about it. If you've given generic pod patching capabilities to a workflow pod, the intention is that it's only going to use those capabilities to patch itself, but it's much easier for that to escape that boundary of patching myself to patching random other things elsewhere in your cluster that you, or elsewhere in your namespace if you've granted it just within the namespace. That really shouldn't be happening, or various workflows interacting with each other. It's definitely a potential security problem to grant that. And so that's where
there's like an improvement on security of your workflow service account roles.
Yes. The other thing is that there's a scenario where you've got a pod on a node, and your cluster is wanting to scale down. So this is the last pod on this node before the cluster scales that node down, removing it from the cluster. So your workflow is running in that pod, on that node, finishes its work, patches itself, and then dies. And then the autoscaler goes, okay, done with that node, deletes the node, which deletes the pod. So you haven't got your task results in the pod annotations anymore for the controller to pick up. And this is a genuine race hazard that happens. There is another patch out there already in for 3.6, which adds a finalizer to the workflow pods. And that finalizer would then guarantee that the pod didn't get deleted until the controller had seen it. I have come to the realization that maybe all that work was for nothing if we've got workflow task results as the only reason. I think there are other scenarios for that finalizer, but that's the one that I'm aware of.
Is there also limitation on like workflow result size in an annotation, like versus being in a workflow task result object?
It's a little bit better. Yes, it's not a massive amount better because generally the pod definition, the rest of the pod spec isn't that huge. I suppose there are some people who put massive scripts into pods, but I don't. It's a small benefit. If you're gaining from that benefit, it's you're probably sort of at the limits anyway.
All right.
Nice. I think that might bring us to time anyway. Look at that.
All right.
Wow. Good to see you, Ryan. And
Cool.
yeah, sure we'll speak soon.
Talk to you later.
Have a good week, everyone.
Okay.